unidentified flying object.
Researcher on a mission with Dr. J. Andy Elias.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Welcome back to another episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I am your host, Dr. J, and always we have a great show for you today. But today is a superstar guest that honestly I have been working on for months, and I'm very excited that he's going to be here. But first, let's talk about contact in the desert. I loved to see all of the people that were there. It was nice to see you all. I would like to see more of you listeners show up next year. Of course, a lot of ticket winners, and sadly, not all of them were claimed. So hopefully next year, you guys that win will show up. What I'd like to hear before the next show is what were your favorite parts, what were your worst parts, and everything in between. What were the stories that stuck out from your mind from being at Contact in the Desert? All you have to do is go to drjradiolive.com and send it through the contact. Now, let's talk about our guest. You're going to hear me say this when I introduce him. So I'm just going to go ahead and spill the beans. Well, first, I honestly compare this guy to a true visionary, a visionary along the lines of Nikola Tesla, Buckminster Fuller, and even Leonardo da Vinci, because all three of these people, and then some, Arthur C. Clarke is another one, really went beyond beyond what is the norm and thought outside the box and really created things that were very not recognized for their time, but were so extraordinary that only after their life were they finally being recognized. Well, this guest was struggling and people weren't taking him seriously because of the fact that he lacked a degree. Well, in comes Foster Gamble, the maker of the movie Thrive, and sees the theories that this gentleman created. And it blew him away because this gentleman that I'm about to introduce is really on the track. This is the unified field theory to its max and then some. You're going to hear so much about physics and how the ancient world had a link to it, and much more. I'm giving you too much information on who's coming on, so let's just go ahead and bring on our guest, and that happens to be Nassim Haramein. Mr. Haramein, welcome to the show.
Hi, Dr. J. It's great to be on your show, and you can call me Nassim.
Nassim, thank you so much. Honestly, it is a true honor to have you on. Ever since I watched the movie Thrive, which essentially, to me, puts you on the map because that's the first time I recognized the theories that you expanded on, theories that you created. And then, of course, after the interview with Foster Gamble, I knew you were the person that I had to speak. In my eyes, and I said this to Mr. Gamble when we were on the show, you are a true visionary, somewhere along the lines of Albert Einstein, Nikola Tesla, Buckminster Fuller, and Leonardo da Vinci, among others. And I guess the first place to start with you is I want to ask you, because when we were talking with Foster, he said that a lot of academics didn't pay attention to you because of a lack of a degree, even though you were on point with your theory. So I wanted to ask you, how did you come about to finding the answers, which we're going to speak to about the answers to the universe, essentially, without giving a clue to what they are?
Well, thank you. Actually, it's a really big honor of being associated with all these people. I'll try not to disappoint you. But for sure, when I was a young boy, I was extremely interested in nature. And I didn't fit well in the academic structure. I was extremely dyslexic. I had, brown skin and a strange name. And so I was bullied a lot. And I just felt very isolated and very separated. from the world, except when I went in nature. When I was in nature, I felt connected, and I felt like there was this, communion with nature, that I could feel the force of nature in my bones or something. And I just, when I looked at nature, I could see patterns emerging, like the way branches of a tree separate, and the way the roots of the tree grow, and the way petals of a flower emerge, and the way leaves grow on the stem of the flower, and all this stuff. And I thought there must be some fundamental geometric structure at the base of creation, from which all of nature, is inspired to grow that way. And so for me, it was kind of the start of an exploration into the foundation of reality. At the very, very base of reality, I felt there was something to discover there, and I spent the rest of my life looking for it.
And you are truly making waves, just like Nikola Tesla at his era. He was way ahead of his time, underappreciated. And as you know, it was only after his death that we started using the AC current, which was rejected by Edison in favor of the DC current then, and so many other things such as the Tesla coils that we now use. Do you believe that you were giving the answers to the universe by some force, such as the same way Leonardo da Vinci was getting ahead of his time, in the same way that Nikola Tesla was receiving information from dreams and a higher realm?
Actually, I believe that the brain and the spinal cord, and actually the nervous system and the whole body, even the bone structure of the body, which are piezoelectric and so on, are actually acting like an antenna in the structure of space-time. That is, that we don't actually manufacture our thoughts. I mean, we have a creative license on our thoughts, but that we're actually downloading information from the structure of space and time at the quantum level, that's a field of information that we're bathing in, and that field is actually what's creating all of our reality, and we are part of that field, and we're like a biocrystal antenna, like a radio set that's tuned to certain frequencies, and if you can tune the radio set just right to certain level of information, all of a sudden you can get very, very profound information. And many of the greatest thinkers and innovators in our world describe this, these moments of illumination as being receiving information from another source, from something bigger than them.
Exactly. And so many people, including Foster Gamble, had the same thing where he was meditating to the universe and asking for the answer. And just like you said, the greatest thinkers of not just our time throughout history have had this. And as you know, we use such a small portion of our brain. And of course, a lot of people talk about the pineal gland being the spiritual antenna. If we were to use our full potential of our brain, do you think we could unlock abilities such as telekinesis, telepathy, and other things like that?
Absolutely. I think that actually these other portions of our brain that appear to be unused are actually parts that are having a very strong interaction with that field I was talking about. And if we were to start to be able to control that, we could influence the field at a much deeper level, at a much stronger level, and have all sorts of capacities that to us today would appear like magical or, spiritual, but actually that I think are some fundamental mechanics of how the universe works. And a lot of the things that we think of as mystical and so on, I believe, are just the physics we haven't understood yet. And I think we're getting closer and closer to understanding them, and that's going to change our world at a really profound level.
I wholeheartedly agree, and sadly, I think that the world powers that be have had an effort, a campaign to essentially dumb us down and prevent us from reaching this consciousness. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that it's been kind of a side effect of the evolution of our society. I tend not to associate. Certainly, there's some fractions in the world that may not have the best intent, and I wouldn't deny that for a minute. But I think that generally, it is part of the evolution of a society. When the mechanical revolution and industrial revolution occur, there's a certain mentality that came with it, and the idea was to create people that could work in factories, and the educational system was set up so that everybody thought the same, and everybody fitted nicely in the box that society needed people to fit in. I think that the evolution is now taking us to a higher level of awareness, and where people individuality and people capacity to tune into certain sets of information are starting to be more honored. But we're still far from actually being able to listen to those people. I experience that myself almost daily. Much of my work is censored. The scientific community has censored many of my papers. So it's very difficult to break through. But it is happening, and so I'm very encouraged. I see it happening every day as well. So I think that in some ways we're finally getting there. Hopefully we're getting there on time, because we're running against a clock right now. We need some of these solutions that comes with these new understandings very, very quickly, because our society is reaching a very important nexus in its evolution.
That's right. With this massive weather anomalies that are happening, the more earthquakes, everything, we are essentially destroying our planet. And you're right, we are running against the clock. And I've seen that your work has been censored, and I'm finally glad that people are finally really accepting it, because you truly do have the answers. And speaking of the answers, I think this is a good time to finally bring in what you thought. Now, I'm going to take us back to 1923. Albert Einstein won the Nobel Physics Prize, and I'm actually going to turn it over to you on what he won and what the theory was that he talked about, and then how you expanded on that and really came up with the answers to everything. Truly everything from an atom all the way up to the supercluster of galaxies and everything in between.
Yeah, well, Einstein won the Nobel Prize for the photoelectric effect, and in his paper, basically, he described and used some of the work that was done by Planck, Max Planck, which was the father of quantum physics, and described this little photon, this little packet of energy that Planck had hypothetically utilized to solve problems that has to do with the thermal emission of a black body. But without getting into much details, Einstein described this little packet of energy, this discovery that actually energy is not a continuum smooth thing, but that it actually is made up of little packets, so that it's quantized. And Einstein eventually called that a photon, and described these photons interacting with semiconductors to produce the photoelectric effect. And this was very significant, because it kind of with the work of Max Planck, birthed the foundation of quantum theory. What I did is I realized that using these little packets of energy at the very fundamentals, you can imagine there's different frequency or different wavelengths of these packets, and there is very, very teeny ones that are called Planck length quantas or Planck length entities. And these little packets make up the structure of space-time at the quantum level. They're very space at the quantum level, or the vacuum of the quantum structure, is very, very dynamic. It has all this energy in it. And what I did is I used these little packets to try to demonstrate or to examine if I could use them to describe the gravitational field of black holes at the cosmological level. And I found a solution in which a volume to surface ratio of these little packets into a black hole. You can think of these little packets as little pieces of information. You can imagine, like, if you take all the information of these packets that are in a black hole, that are inside the volume, and then there is some on the surface of that black hole, that there would be a surface to volume ratio. And I found that surface to volume ratio is exactly equivalent to the gravitational force of that black hole, or its gravitational mass, or if you like, its mass. So I found a solution to gravity, a solution to Einstein's gravitational equation, using the little quantum packets, which usually don't mix. Usually you got quantum physics on one side, and you got relativity on the other that takes care of gravity, and the two don't talk. One is for big objects, and one is for small objects. But we know that big objects are made out of small objects, and so I found this first solution for gravity with small objects, with Planck structures, and then I applied it to the nucleus of an atom and found the correct solution for that, for the radius of a proton, which is really, really important because it is the heart of the atom. It is the force that's in the middle of an atom that makes up all of our atomic structure, all of the stuff we call reality around us. And what this demonstrated is that reality is actually made out of this energy that's in the space. So it's actually the space that makes up the matter, not the matter that defines the space.
Exactly. And one thing that you mentioned which is so true, and a lot of people seem to forget, every large thing is made up of small things. And even the small things are made up of the absolute smallest things, which of course are atoms. And you can go even further than that and go within the atoms, like the nucleus and things like that. Now, let's talk about the torus and of course, how this applies to what you just said.
Well, that's the thing. It's that these dynamics. First of all, I think that there's something remarkable when I did these equations. First, the radius of the proton I predicted in the 2012 paper was the radius of the proton or the nucleus of the atom was measured more precisely than ever in history in 2013, and a few months after I had made the prediction, and my prediction happened to be exactly right, or within 0.00036 of the measurement, or inside the margin of error of their measurement, which means that my prediction might be exact and the measurement is getting closer to it. This is, to this day, the most precise theoretical prediction of the nucleus of an atom on the planet. The standard model of particle physics is off by 4%. That creates a lot of problems for the standard model. But as well, when I did the calculation, there was something that was really remarkable, and that is when I counted the amount of information or the amount of Plancks that are present inside the nuclei of the proton or inside the proton in the nuclei of the atom. The proton, for people to understand scale, let's just give it an idea of scale. You're made out of about 100 trillion cells. So cells are already really small. I mean, there's 100 trillion of them in you, 50 to 100 trillion of them in you. And each one is made of about 100 trillion atoms. So now you get a sense how small atoms are. And then if an atom was like the dome of the Vatican, then the nuclei, or the proton in the middle, would be the head of a pin. So that's really teeny. So like the volume of a proton is like 10 to the minus 39 centimeter cube. It's teeny little volume, right? A period with 39 zeros behind it. And so it's very small. But when I counted the Plancks, because the Plancks are so teeny, if I grew a Planck so it was the size of a grain of sand, then the proton would be a diameter from here to Alpha Centauri, which is about 40 trillion kilometers. So this little Plancks, when I counted how many there is in a proton, I found that there was the exact amount of mass energy, if I calculated their mass energy or their information, as all the other protons in the universe. That is, the mass of the little Planck, the energy level of the vacuum structure inside a proton is equivalent to all the other protons in the universe, the mass of the universe, meaning all the information of all the other protons in the universe is present in each proton in terms of quantum information. And people might think, well, how is that possible? Like, how do you get a whole universe inside a proton? It's not the whole universe, it's just the information of the universe, just like, you might have a CD with an orchestra music on it, and the information that all the orchestra produce, you don't have the violin on there and the cello and all this stuff. You just have the information. And so it really showed that the universe is connected, that the universe is holographic in nature, and there's more and more science emerging, even in the mainstream, with the holographic principle that's showing that the universe is truly holographic in nature, and many articles are being published on that lately. But how it relates to the torus is that it showed that as well, that the information that's present in each point is interacting with all the other points, and it's in a constant flow. And the dynamic of that flow is a flow that goes from the inside to the outside, and then interact with the field, and then back to the inside in a continuous feedback loop, or feed-forward loop, if you like. And the geometry that accommodates that kind of dynamic is a torus, and you see it everywhere. You see it in the magnetic fields of the Earth. You see it in the magnetic fields of the Sun, and galaxies, quasar, pulsars. I mean, you see it everywhere. The toroidal dynamics of nature is very prominent, and it's very telling about this constant feedback. So what I'm describing here, just for the listener, is that the universe is talking to itself in a continuous feedback, in which each point is in contact with every other point, and that's how it's self-organized, which is a big problem in science. Is how is the universe all of a sudden making incredible complexities like the biology on our planet and human beings with 100 trillion cells and all this stuff? How is it doing that? Because if you do it under random functions, you don't expect that. If you think the universe is just random, disconnected, nothing is talking to anything, things are isolated, it would not produce this type of complexity. The probability of one cell to occur is extremely low or not even relevant. So so this starts to tell us why the universe is able to self-organize.
The torus, the way it works, as you mentioned, is energy flows in and then it comes out and goes circles around the field and then flows back in. That's correct, right?
Yeah, that's correct. And when it does that, it comes back changed because through its journey, it's it's been altered by the rest of the environment. So it's always coming back change. It's going through a learning process as it's moving across. It's not staying the same. It's like a dynamic equilibrium.
So it's essentially evolving each time it goes through the center and back around.
Exactly. And what I'm showing in my equation is that when it goes through the center, it's learning from all the other toruses in the universe. It's interacting with the whole, and then comes back and as an individual, and then interacts with the whole again, and comes back and this is how the universe evolves.
Now, you've been able to apply this to everything, and I know we hinted at that, things as small as a proton to an atom to a cell to a human body to anything in nature to the galaxy. Can you give some examples? For instance, our atmosphere on our planet to our sun and how they are using the toroidal dynamics.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at the Coriolis effects and the atmosphere on our planet, you find that the hurricane and typhoons are spinning in opposite direction, and they move from the equator down. They move from the poles down to the equator, and then back up to the poles in a dynamic toroid. And my theory predicted that actually the structure that makes up the material world is not just a single toroid, but a dual toroid, or a dual torus, because there is Coriolis effect, and because there's spin counterspin, because there's polarity, and so there's always two toroids interacting, making the sphere, and so there's one on the North Pole, for instance, of our Earth that like goes, and so the plasma dynamics of the weather systems go all the way down to the equator and then back up to the pole, and then from the South Pole up to the equator and back down to the South Pole. And so we see those dynamics very clearly on our planet. We see them very clearly in the solar dynamics, where we see the plasma dynamics of our sun, where the plasma is moving up towards the pole and then back down towards the equator in the double torus structure. And this double torus creates a pinch at the equator where the structure of space-time is oscillating. And this is why planetary system, or rings around planets and so on, always orbit at the equator of things. And even, you can look at galaxies where most of the matter is pinched between the two toruses, at the galactic disk or the accretion disk of the black hole, or even the rings of Saturn and the rings of Jupiter. All these are unexplained phenomenon in standard models. There's nothing in the Einstein worked on it, Hubble worked on it, but there's nothing, that was actually complete by any of them to explain why rings don't form, for instance, in a polar direction of a planet, or why planets orbit at the equator of a sun, or why matter is confined or mostly confined to the galactic disk of a galaxy. this starts to explain why. And so we see those double torus dynamic as well in pulsars, quasars. We see these big jets coming out of black holes and those dynamics. And so there's something very profound there that has to do with how this Planck field of information is moving at the quantum level. And I've been able to now prove that these big objects are actually, like black holes, are actually the result of this Planck information orbiting like this in space, making a black hole.
Now, how do we apply this to essentially getting to, obviously, as you know, for space travel, we've been using ancient technology, really the internal combustion engine. 150 years ago, the same technology we were using then, burning chemicals to travel. And actually, it goes even further back than that to China, thousands of years ago, or at least 1,000 years ago, when they were launching fireworks and rockets by burning chemicals. What can we do using the toroidal dynamics and the torus and everything else and what you've uncovered with gravity to essentially make better our space travel?
Yeah, we need to transcend our space travel. I was just talking to an astronaut a few days ago, and we're wanting to there's large efforts in the private rocket industry to have a program in which we're going to go and colonize Mars and so on. And, doing all this with rocketry is actually not really feasible. And it needs to go to the next level. We need to actually understand what gravity is and learn to utilize it to our advantage and in some ways, direct it the way we want it to be directed. Just like, a few hundred years ago, we learned to use the electromagnetic field to better our society. So we learn how to use electricity and magnetism, and pretty well everything we have today in our technology is the result of understanding the electromagnetic field and how it works, and controlling it and being able to utilize it to better our society. The same way is some of the equations I've written, and certainly the equation in which I was able to predict the radius of the proton and the force that holds the protons together, which I demonstrated in a paper, is actually gravity. It's quantum gravity that's produced by this Planck field at the base of reality. And these equations are basically gravitational equations, but they're telling us something vastly different than the gravitational equations we've been using from Einstein. They're telling us that gravity is actually, Einstein was right when he said that gravity was the curvature of space-time. That is, that if you put like if you put a ball on a trampoline surface, it curves the trampoline, and another ball would appear to be attracted. That's basically what Einstein described in his equation. Well, let's change the analogy. Let's think of a tub, and you pull the plug in the tub, and maybe you have a rubber ducky in there, and your rubber ducky, as you're taking your bath, after you pull the plug, you can see the rubber ducky. If he's far away from the plug, he's not feeling any effects. But if you bring it closer to where the drain is, you start to see its orbit, and you start to see it getting attracted towards the drain. If you were to use that analogy to describe Einstein's field equation, the curvature of the surface of the water towards the middle of the drain would be what Einstein described. But the fact is that curvature is secondary to the molecules of water that are spinning, co-moving, and spinning going into the drain. That's what's producing the effect. And really what my equation shows is that the curvature of space-time that Einstein described is actually the result of all these little Plancks in the vacuum spinning together, creating the curvature. And that leads to direct engineering towards devices that will control the curvature of space-time, because all of a sudden, curving space-time is a matter of spinning the quantum field. If you can spin the quantum field, you can curve space-time according to these equations, and all of a sudden, you can produce your own gravitational field, and you can direct them the way you want. And that would give us gravity control. And gravity control will change our civilization profoundly. All of a sudden, you can go to space, you can go to Jupiter for the weekend, you can, it changes everything. We would have access to almost infinite amount of resources. Everything becomes very, very different when you have gravity control. And that's just one simple understanding of what gravity is.
I have two things to say about this. Do you know who Bob Lazar is?
Yes, I have met with Bob, I think, a few times.
Anyway, as you know, of course, he talked about when he was reverse engineering at S4 in Area 51, the craft, and when he talked about the anti-gravity, essentially how these craft propel themselves.
Oh, yes. I don't think I have met with him, but I remember seeing some of his stuff. Yeah.
But just as you mentioned, rather than being propelled like we have an airplane, which has thrust and pushing it, these gravity generators are swung in the direction, and essentially this creates the field for the craft to essentially fall in that, for infinity in that direction.
Right.
And he also talked about the fact, and this is exactly with what you said, that if we can control gravity, then things that we once thought were science fiction will be thrown out the door that afternoon and become science fact. All of a sudden, force fields will become a reality. All of a sudden, faster than light travel will become a reality.
Right.
The ability to possibly create a wormhole,
right,
and even alter time. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. And I know that listeners might think that this is going to be generations from now, but I assure you that this is coming to our reality very, very quickly. For instance, there's experiments that are being done in Finland where a superconductive material was spun at about 5,000 RPM, and then a electron source was fired up, and it produces a gravitational beam that can have an effect on an object a kilometer and a half away. And this is reported in peer-reviewed journal. And the beam velocity or transmission across the space is measured at 64 times the speed of light. So that means that when the electrons are shot across the beam and affects the objects on the other side at 64 times faster than the speed of light. So we're talking about something that's actually happening right now. Gravity control is on its way, and it will make significant changes. And when you actually understand the equations I wrote, in combination with understanding the dynamics of the field, basically as Mr. Lazard was talking about, when you spin the structure of space-time, and there's very specific ways on how you can interact with space-time to spin it. Of course, plasmas may be involved and so on, but when you actually create this field, you're creating a toroidal dynamic, and you can displace that toroidal dynamic so that, as you were saying, you're literally falling into the curvature of space-time ahead of the craft, and the craft is just falling through space and moving at very, very high velocity. This is all on its way. And, science fiction has always been ahead of of science fact. You can see that in history all the time. Many inventions that were later manifested were in science fiction long before. Rockets going to the moon, submarines. I mean, many things we have today and we take for granted, planes and so on, was in science fiction before it was science fact, because we need to visualize it, we need to think about it, and then eventually we can do it.
Exactly. And as fast as science and history is written, it's rewritten that much faster, because the more knowledge we get, obviously we have to update what we know. So therefore, as you mentioned, everything from submarines to airplanes, even going to the moon, that was all science fiction. 150 years ago, if you told somebody that you can see somebody on a device from across the world in real time and speak to them, they would have laughed your brains out. But now everybody's out there with an iPhone.
Right.
The second thing I wanted to say to you, going back with involving your equations, is Ben Rich, the leader of the Skunk Works I don't know if he was vice president or president of Lockheed, in the early 90s, he gave a presentation at the UCLA Engineering Alumni Group. And at the end of the presentation, he showed a flying saucer, and he said three things. He said, one, that we now have the technology to take E.T. home. We have things in the Nevada desert that would make George Lucas envious. And he said that the answers to essentially to unlocking things are ESP. But the main thing that relates to what you're saying is, he says, there was a problem in our equations with gravity. I'm assuming he was referring to Einstein, and we had figured them out. And hence that's where we were able to create gravity. You talked about Finland, and do you know about Ben Rich? Do you believe that Skunk Works had already uncovered these equations that you've been working on, and you uncovered and have been using them?
I think there was some really good work that has been done. In black budgets. I mean, they have definitely the budgets to be able to really explore these things, and I would be very surprised if they haven't been able to produce some of these effects and get some levels of success with it. Absolutely. What's sad is that it stays in these covert operations, and it's not given to the public for the transcendence of some of the most significant problems we have in our society today, and that's kind of the result of the way our society is set up, the industrial military complex having very, very large interest and continuing to sell oil and so on. So it really is an issue, and it's breaking up now, and it's coming out. Nobody can tell how far they got. I think there was some issues as well with some of the work they were doing, with instabilities, with radioactivity, and so on. So I'm not sure they succeeded to the level that they wished they would have. But I think that now we're getting closer and closer to something really, really significant, and our world is going to change dramatically in the next decade.
Exactly. Over 5,000 patents have been suppressed in the name of national security. Clearly, as you mentioned, the military-industrial complex doesn't want some of these things to be shown. But on the other end, 30 years ago, you had only mainstream media. Now we have alternative media. We have shows such as this, which are international. People have the ability to photograph, videotape something, and upload it to YouTube, and it can go viral before anybody has a chance to censor it. And of course, you And your equations and your theories are finally having a chance to have such a major platform where in the past they may have been suppressed. And that's why I think it is so important that we continue to push your work, because you truly have the answers and we can really get to a better place. Now, I'm going to go back to the torus. And one thing that blew me away is, of course, the fact that it has something to do with the double tetrahedron. And maybe I'm hoping you could describe that a little bit more with I believe it has 64 points. But what blew me away was in the Kabbalah, the tree of life. I never understood that, but yet when I saw Thrive, and then of course with you and Foster talking about the torus and how it applies to everything, he brought up the fact that the tree of life, along with so many other things, is obviously using the same principle. And then, of course, so is so many sites in our ancient history, even in the Vatican. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of startling and remarkable because of the approach I took to understanding nature and the studies I've done in physics. And I spent some 25 years studying physics full time. As I was doing that, so I was studying physics, I was studying at the same time nature, and of course, as I studied nature, I studied ancient civilization, because many of the ancient civilizations had very deep understanding of the natural world. I found that so many of them had very significant ancient symbols that seem to match with each other, like that seem to show various perspectives of the same thing across the world. So it seemed like all the ancient civilizations, or at least a big portion of them, agreed that there was a fundamental pattern. That if we understood that pattern, we could literally go to the stars, and that pattern. Now this is the interesting part, is that knowledge was given to man by sun gods or some advanced civilization that had come to Earth from the stars. I mean, they're very specific about this. They don't talk about the gods as some, esoteric thing that they are imagining. They're talking about the gods as literally having come from the stars, and having built incredible structures, and having made incredible temples, and being able to have boats that float in the air. I mean, in the Vedic text, they're even more specific. They talk about flying machines, and so on. And when you look at all these symbols, many of them represent a toroidal flow and a fundamental geometric structure that has to do with tetrahedrons. And, so I studied all this because as I was writing the physics and studying the physics, I was coming up with very specific geometric structures that would be at the base of reality, and these seem to match these ancient symbols. And it was kind of remarkable. And it was generally, it was heuristic. I didn't have the exact equation on how that all worked until more recently, when I wrote this equation for the radius and the mass of the proton and the new solution to gravity, where I realized that when I was counting the Plancks that are inside the volume or on the surface of a black hole, the little Planck spheres had to be intersecting, because it had to be space filling. Like all the surface of the black hole had to have one Planck there. And so that if there were little Planck spheres, they couldn't be just adjacent to each other, because that would make holes between them. they had to be intersecting, and as I looked at how they would intersect, I ended up with these symbols, like the flower of life symbol that's found in most of the ancient cultures around the world, and the way they triangulate in three-dimensional space was tetrahedral arrays. And so I basically found what I had thought was significant, but I found, like, my equation outputted it without me even trying. It gives the exact correct solution for gravity when the Planck circle interactions or toroidal interactions produce that geometry. So it's really kind of remarkable, and it really makes you think about what knowledge was present thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, maybe even prior to our written history. Maybe there was a civilization on our planet that was way more advanced than us, that left or evacuated a long time before our written history.
I'm actually glad you mentioned that. In Peru, there is an area. It has a wall, and it's got four different layers, and the top layer is the modern. The layer beneath that is where the Spanish conquistadors, when they arrived in Peru. Yeah. The layer below that is the Incas, but the layer below that is so well done and so precise, and the bricks, if you want to call them that, are so tight that you couldn't even fit a human hair. And yet that predates all of the other civilizations, which clearly shows that anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 to several thousand years ago, there was an advanced culture that had technology and the ability to create structures that we can't even replicate today.
Yeah, absolutely. And if there was only one or two of those anomalies around the world, it'd be one thing. But there is literally hundreds, if not thousands, of examples of very advanced engineering, very advanced, stone cutting or moving of megalithic stones. I mean, in Egypt you find 1,000-ton, obelisks that have been moved hundreds of miles from their quarry. I mean, these things don't happen with civilizations that are literally living, in caves. People from that era don't just start building incredibly precise pyramidal structures because they have nothing else to do. And not only that, is that typically in all of these civilizations around the world, none of them claim to have built these things. They don't go around saying, oh yeah, we built the pyramids. Like in Egypt, there's no walls anywhere that describes the Egyptian building the pyramids. If anything, there's much more evidence that the Egyptians were saying that the pyramids were already there and they were built by the sun gods and that they were interacting with beings that came from the stars. So, this might be very hard to believe, but the evidence is very, very strong. And then if we think about it from another context, we live in an incredibly rich universe. There's billions of stars in our galaxy alone. At the last survey, we're having a hard time finding stars that don't have planets. It's remarkable. And we're finding more and more, millions of planets that, from the estimates that are currently available, like even in just our region of one galaxy, there can be millions of planets with life on them. There is no, and why, of course there may be civilization out there that have learned to use gravity, that have learned to travel through space-time using wormholes, that have been able to go across the universe, or at least across the galaxy, and why wouldn't it be possible that, there was interaction with very advanced beings a very long time ago? And even in modern history, there's a lot of evidence of, UFO activities from sources that are very credible. You're talking high-level military personnel, airplane pilots. You're talking, millions of people at this point, a lot of material. And so when you're looking for the evidence with a very sober look and being honest about the conclusions, it would be hard to conclude that this phenomenon have not been occurring for real, and that we may have been in contact with very advanced cultures a long time ago.
Exactly. You said so many things that are so true. First of all, every culture around the planet, every ancient civilization talks about the star people giving them wisdom and so many other things. And like you said, it's undeniable the fact that people that couldn't have had any contact, for instance, the Egyptians, did they have contact with the Peruvians? No, but you'll see similar structures. And then, of course, as you mentioned with the UFOs, there are so many credible people that have come forward, so many people that have been on the show that you just can't deny. They're unimpeachable in every possible way. Anyhow, we're going to take a quick short break. So much more, everybody, with Nassim Haramein when we return in just a few short minutes.
This is Foster Gamble, and you are listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I am your host, Dr. J. And before we resume with Mr. Nassim Haramein, let's just go over some important news. Of course, All the videos are located on Dr. J Radio Live, as this show will be. Michael Dukakis, who appeared in a couple months ago back in early April. The video has been out, and you guys have given a lot of comments. Of course, there's mixed reviews because he is, of course, a Democrat, and you Republicans out there have different stories. But he is going to come back. And, of course, he would love to take your questions. He's not going to take them on air. So if any of you have any questions you'd like to submit when he's going to be back on, please do. For those of you who have been sharing all your stories and you want me to read them on air, please continue to do so. Everything, again, is available on drjradiolive.com, drjradiolive.com. And, of course, all the recent interviews have been posted. Everyone from Michael Cremo to Michael Tellinger, and so many more. And, of course, as I mentioned, this will be there. Now let's go to our guest, Mr. Haramein. Welcome back to the hour. I wanted to ask you, where can people find you? What's your website, and what's new for you? What are you going to be doing in the next few months?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, there's two websites. One is the Resonance Project website, which is a nonprofit foundation, which is resonance.is. So resonance is, it's easy to remember. And we have a academy website, the Resonance Academy, which can be found from our website at Resonance is. So, we've just actually launched a worldwide academy on the internet where we have courses that people can take. We just the 1st of May launched the course called the Delegate Program Level 1 course, which is 6 modules. It's pretty extensive. It's about a 12 weeks course. It's wonderful. It has all of the information from advanced physics to ancient civilization to technologies that are emerging in the world today, and some very fundamental philosophic roots as well, and talk about biology and all this. It's all in there. It's remarkable, and it's really great to finally have everything in one place that people can go to. And they can study as deep as they want, or, go as light as they want throughout the course. So the Resonance Academy is some stuff that I'm very involved with. There's a movie coming out this summer, so that's exciting, called The Connected Universe. And it's being worked on and produced by Malcolm Carter, which is a great filmmaker in Canada and Vancouver, and I'm really looking forward to that coming out. And it involves some of my work in there. I think it's going to be a really fun, important movie. So there's lots going on as well. We're working diligently here in laboratory to to expand and some of the technologies that can be tested and worked on from the theoretical framework of some of the stuff I've written. As well, we're working with other physicists, and so we just published a paper that's going to be presented in a conference in Portugal at the end of this month. And that paper describes the brain and the event of consciousness as a result of the interaction with this field of information, not being manufactured by the brain, but actually being interacted with the brain from this fundamental field of information, so that the brain acts more like an antenna than actually manufacturing the information. The other thing is I'm working with Dr. a Miraval Baker on a astrophysical paper, and that paper I'm really excited about. We're actually describing cosmogenesis based on the theory I've written so far and the results I've gotten in a completely different way than the Big Bang. And we're able to describe and prove, mathematically at least, that the universe is actually a continuous creation process in which matter is continuously being generated from the inside of the universe, and matter is continuously escaping our universe. And interestingly, just recently, last year, a paper that had been lost from Einstein that was recovered and published. So Einstein actually published last year. That paper was Einstein exploring the possibility of a continuous creation universe in which there was matter creation occurring and matter escaping our universe. Very, very similar stuff. So I'll be able to quote Einstein, or at least cite Einstein in my paper. So that's all of the stuff I'm involved with right now.
And this is exactly why I think you're such an amazing visionary and a true cosmologist, because you are truly, in my heart, up there with Einstein. And to be able to expand on his theory and to prove what he was exploring as being right, and to break away what the mainstream scientists have as old data and bring the new data is really important. Before I go back to asking the ancient, one other quick question real quick. Didn't you just recently do a TEDx talk?
Yeah, I just, actually a few days ago, I was doing a TEDx talk at UCSD, the California University of San Diego, and that was a lot of fun. It was a big challenge to try to present unified field theory in 18 minutes and have it make sense and have it have some meaning in people's mind. But I tried. I think it came out half decent. I think it'll be all right. It's hard to tell because when you're presenting, you don't know how it's coming across. But hopefully it worked out.
Exactly, and I know it will because you, like I said, you are such a true visionary, and I'm really glad that your information is finally getting out to the mainstream, because what we were talking about last hour, that fact that a lot of these black budget operations keep everything secret, that's doing a disservice to humankind, to all of mankind. Why? Because you don't have the most qualified people in that little tiny box, where as opposed to if you give it the information to the public, then everybody can step forward and throw in their 2 cents and make things a little better. So the fact that you're able to do this unhindered is fantastic. One quick question with regards to what we said earlier. The fact that you've had such a lot of your work censored, do you believe that is still happening to this day, or has finally people have backed off in the sense and have allowed you to finally spread this amazing knowledge?
No, there's still a lot of censorship. Sorry, going on. There is a lot of, like even just currently, other physicists that are advance some of my solutions to gravity are trying to publish papers in which they, of course, citing my papers since they're advancing my work, and they're having their papers censored. The certain organizations are refusing to place a paper on the internet and so on. And so it is very much going on still. It's extremely difficult. When I made these predictions of the radius of proton, I was invited to talk at, I'd rather not say names right now, but I was invited in very prestigious laboratories in Europe to give talks, and then those talks were censored. So, it really is difficult. It is a battle. It is a struggle. But it's opening up slowly but surely. Behind the scene, there is many, many, many physicists and scientists that are coming to us that are very excited about what we're doing. They're not necessarily able to be public about it because of repercussions to their family and to their career in if they were to become vocal about it. So it is there is a push, there is an underground swell that's occurring, but it's not necessarily obvious right now because of some of the censorship that's occurring at the same time.
It's really sad that mainstream people who are legitimately looking at your work and realizing that it holds the answers can't talk about it because of fear of repercussions from not just the ridicule, but even going a step further to possibly silencing them. Before I go back to the ancient cultures and picking up from that conversation, I want to shift to the movie Thrive, because when we were talking to Foster Gamble, he told me that when he first brought you around, one of his professors from Princeton sort of blew you off because you didn't have a degree. But years later, after he worked with you, he finally came to him in sort of secret and said that he was sort of right on the money. And I wanted to ask you, how did your relationship with Foster start? And I know he worked with you for about 3 years, and you did some high-level work with some of the top scientists in the world. And so how did that come to be? How did that come to be where you found him, and how did he aid you in getting this information out there?
Oh, wow. Foster was such a significant mentor for me. And supported me, and much of what I'm able to do today had to do with the support that Foster gave me in the early days, and so I'm so grateful to him. It was really amazing, if there is such a thing, coincidence, that Foster and I met. I was, at the time, I had just finished about a 5-year stretch in which I lived in a van. I lived in a small camper van that so that I could do research without having the cost of rent and the cost of living could be very, very low. And so I had been completely engrossed in work in researching every minute of awake time I had, and I didn't sleep much. And I was at the end of that stretch where I had completely ran out of resources, and I was having to go back. I was in the States, and I was having to go back towards Canada because my previous career was I was a ski coach and ski instructor. To go back to try to do a contract so I could make a little more money and go back to researching. And I literally didn't have enough money to pay for the gas to go. I was in Joshua Tree in Southern California to go back up to Canada. So I stopped in the Bay Area in San Francisco, where I knew a few researchers there. And I hung out with them, and they helped organize a talk so I could make a little money and go on back to Canada. And so this talk was at an eclectic community of various scientists and university people, professors, and so on, that all hung out in these locals that were called 3220. That was the address, and so I gave the talk there, and so there was a lot of scientists there, a few PhDs in physics, mathematicians, and so on, and one of the person that came was Foster Gamble. And so I give this talk, and Foster had been studying Buckminster Fuller for a long time. He was well, read on many of the geometry and as well, studied Walter Russell and many other great thinkers throughout history. He had developed his own ideas on the fundamental structure of the vacuum and space, and everything he was thinking of and everything I was talking about was meshing so exactly well that he became very enthralled, and he was in the middle of organizing a large conference with some very prominent physicists and mathematicians to present ideas, for people to present ideas on unification theory. And so he invited me immediately to go and present there, which was a great honor. And so I presented there, and this started, a relationship that is still very much present to this day between Foster and I. And, he supported me in those early years, got me a small apartment and, made sure I had food on my table so I could continue to research. And eventually my first labs and so on. So it really, and Foster is such an amazing person. And what Foster really taught me as well was how to, have empathy and compassion for scientists that have spent their whole life researching something, and how it must feel when somebody else comes along and says, well, it's actually not like this, it's more like this. And, how difficult that is for somebody to hear. And so I learned a lot from Foster on the human part of things as well, on how to interact with the world in such a way that I wouldn't be taking in such an abrasive way.
I think Foster is such an amazing person because he is a true philanthropist, putting the movie Thrive together with his own money and giving it out for free and then spending millions of dollars to fact-check everything. That, to me, is a true philanthropist. What are your plans for the future with Foster? Because I know when we interviewed him, of course, like I said, he spoke very, very highly of you, and all you listeners out there recall that. And, of course, you could hear it again on YouTube. And what I inferred from him is that he's got more things to do with you.
Oh, yeah. His organization and my organization always work in parallel. We're always in contact. And, of course, the Thrive movement has a lot of value in helping, get the word out and getting people involved and in a dynamic way to find solutions and apply them and support the work that's being done. So absolutely, Foster and I always are collaborating, and we are as well, attempting to help other inventors and thinkers, scientists, and so on, to help them bring either their theoretical work or their technology out and so on into the world, which can be tricky. So, I think that the Academy as well that I just launched, and some of the work that Foster is doing with the Thrive movement is going to mesh in the future and become more coherent, and we definitely have all kinds of collaborative adventures coming up.
Exactly, and I really look forward to them all. One thing I forgot to ask you early on in the show, who was your inspiration? What led you down the path to study physics and eventually get to these equations that really are the answers to everything we've been looking for?
I think my inspiration was definitely my father early on, not directly, because my father was a professor of psychology, child psychology, that worked with Piaget in his early PhD thesis, and then eventually branched off. But my father was a great thinker, and he gave me that sense that that things, may not be as they appear, and you have to pay attention. You have to think profoundly about things. You can't just take it at face value. And then certainly Einstein was my hero. Not just the work he did in physics, but the way he was. Einstein was a deep thinker, a deep spiritual man. Not in a religious sense, but in a sense of feeling this communion with nature. And he was an amazing being, and certainly so Einstein, Max Planck, all the greatest. Newton was a great inspiration for me. Not the Newton that's well known in the typical mainstream view, but actually the private writings of Newton, which are emerging now, which were censored for hundreds of years, where actually you discover that Newton was absolutely not the Newton that's being portrayed in history books. The guy that's very calculated and the guy that's very, mechanical in his thoughts and so on. Actually, Newton was very esoteric and came up with incredible knowledge. And many of the things I'm talking about today are present in Newton's private writings, and I really believe that if Newton wouldn't have got censored, we would be going to the stars today.
I agree, and I'm glad you mentioned Einstein being your inspiration as well as Newton, because to me, I think not only are you continuing Einstein's work, had he been alive today, not only would he be your colleague, he'd probably be asking you to help him to understand some of the things that you've uncovered. I honestly put you on that level.
Well, I appreciate it. I think that if Einstein was publishing relativity today, he would be encountering many of the difficulties that we are encountering, people like Foster and I and others. It's extremely difficult. And if Einstein, even at the time, wouldn't have got the support from Planck, from Max Planck, which, basically took Einstein's work and brought it to the mainstream and say, we need to pay attention to this. Einstein probably wouldn't have been able to break through. So it was there at the time too. And this is the inherent difficulty in the current educational structure and academic structure, which does not really open up to groundbreaking ideas so easily.
Yes, exactly, and that sadly, that's the problem with our society, that things are being withheld and that there is so much trouble to getting this information out there. But this is why I'm so happy that we're in the 21st century and have access to alternative media to be able to get this knowledge out there, where it was a lot easier for them, the powers that be that wanted this censored, to censor in that era of Einstein, and even, like I said, 20, 30 years ago, whereas now it is much more difficult. They still do it, of course, but it is much more difficult. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm going to go back to what we were talking about prior to the break about the ancient cultures. You said some things that really fascinated me and really resonated with me, because just like you, I've been studying the ancient cultures as well. Now, there's, of course, the sacred geometry there, and we are well aware, and we said this multiple times, that all the ancient cultures had some sort of contact with star people, or the gods. They call them sun gods, depending on which culture you talk about had a name for it. That provided them wisdom, architecture, and technology, and so many other things. Do you think that the humankind at the time, mankind, knew the information that you're talking about now, which is represented in the sacred geometry, the flower of life patterns that appear all around the world, and we lost it somewhere along the line of human history? Or was that what the gods essentially planted here on Earth as a reminder for us in the future to unlock ourselves and understand it for ourselves the way you did, as opposed to teaching it to mankind and losing it throughout time?
Yeah, I would say maybe the latter is what I come to understand from the research I've done in extensive ancient civilization from around the world, because I believe that some of the information was understood by the ancient people, and certainly I think they had a sense of this fundamental field. I don't think that they were able to apply it directly to, for instance, technological development and so on themselves. I think that the sun gods did that for them and taught them and worked with them. But I think that as soon as the sun gods actually stopped interacting with the humans of the time, that humanity went backwards in terms of its understanding and its capacity to do things. And you see a very, very sharp decline in, construction techniques and capacity to move large objects, and all that goes away very rapidly. So I think the knowledge was mostly held by these more advanced civilizations that may have been present at the time, early in history. And I know that might sound really out there, and some people may struggle with that kind of theories, but the evidence is so dramatically present, it's really hard to ignore.
Exactly. It really is. One thing that you mentioned earlier is you talked about the obelisks that were so massive in scale and were moved so far from where the quarries were. And some people speculate that the technology used had something to do with sound waves or something that, of course, altered the gravity to essentially make them weightless and to levitate and put them in place. Mm-hmm. Do you know about that? Do you think that it had something to do with sound, or what's your understanding of how that technology works?
Right. I think that there is some veracity to that, but I don't think that it was unaided. Meaning, I think that some of the technology that I'm discussing, that I'm attempting to reproduce, and some of the technology that was present there has a direct, can be activated or amplified with certain sound vocal waves, and so that the sound part that's described in these ancient texts where they're talking about moving object with sound and all this stuff is actually, amplified by a certain technological means that are present, not just the people using their voice or the sound of trumpets, or, it's even described in the Bible where the walls of Jericho crumbles when all the trumpets are blown. But what goes along with the trumpet is that this object that was called the Ark of the Covenant that had some power source inside it that was able to, for instance, is described in the Torah, that was able to levitate on its own and levitate its carriers and so on. that object was utilized to turn around the walls of Jericho for 7 days prior to blowing the trumpet, and so on. So I think that, it's not just the sound. I think that sound is part of it, but that there's a technology involved that amplifies the effect to create this gravitational effect.
Another thing that we were talking about too, of course, is the fact of the different planets, right? And there's so many out there that the Kepler telescope has found to date 5,000 Goldilocks planets. The ironic thing, though, is they're using the way they decide the Goldilocks planets are, can mankind survive? But see, we're carbon-based. Assume another life form is silicone-based or something else. Therefore, it wouldn't necessarily have to be within the Goldilocks zone. It could be in another environment and another climate to thrive and eventually evolve into something else. What do you think that... Obviously, with all these planets being out there, and obviously there has to be so many different levels of civilization, ranging from people that are far less evolved from us to beings that are millions of years, if not 1 billion years ahead of us in evolution. What do you think it's going to take for us to finally get the understanding of the fact that, yes, life exists out there, and what we need to do essentially to get mankind to understand that just because we can't get there doesn't mean they can't get here.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I don't know. I think that if you're asking when are we going to get it, I think that we're getting close, especially with gravity control coming our way. I think as soon as we have the capacity to move around a little further than our moon, we might encounter some of these civilizations that have been waiting for us to kind of graduate. I believe they're right there on the edge of our awareness. Like you said very correctly, yes, we are assuming that life develops the same way that we see life on this planet, and that's a large assumption. But even by using that assumption, we're finding a lot of Goldilocks planets out there, and that's just for the small sample of star system that we're able to examine. If we extrapolate that percentage, the whole galaxy, it's not 5,000 planets. We're talking millions and millions, if not billions of planets are out there that could support life as we know it. Now they could, and we always get surprised that life can emerge out of places we think, even on this planet, where we think no way there could be life there. Like, for instance, not so long ago, we didn't think that life could exist in the deep ocean near these hot vents where the water is almost boiling and there is no light and so on. And then we finally got down there, and the place is teeming with life. And so I actually believe, and I used to say that in physics conference, I actually believe that the universe out there is teeming with life. And I used to be told that was probably not the case because water was in the universe should be very rare, and that there's probably not many planets out there. Now we know that there is a lot of planets. In fact, most stars have them. And everywhere we look, this is really remarkable, everywhere we look in the universe, even between galaxies, which is very, vacuum-like, we find, spectral lines of water. So water is actually present everywhere. We're even finding that stars are born in these huge clouds of water, and so this idea that life is rare in the universe is finally slowly going away. Now, the idea that they couldn't make it here is really an arrested idea because, of course, look at the evolution of computers in the last 50 years. Imagine a civilization that has even just 500 years on us, 1,000 years on us. What would their computer look like? Or a few thousand years on us. And of course, some of these civilizations have understood how to use gravity to their advantage. There is, a lot of evidence in our own physics, in our own standard physics, that wormholes exist, that you can curve space-time to create links between very far places and traverse them. So there is, I think, plenty of logical reason to think that advanced civilization most likely have been able to survey our region of the galaxy and has found our planet. And then there's a lot of physical evidence to prove it, from ancient history to modern, eyewitnesses that are very credible.
That's right. And I totally agree with what you said. It is the height of human arrogance to believe that we are alone. And as you mentioned, everywhere we look, we're finding planets. Just the 5,000 Goldilocks planets we identified are just within our galaxy alone, let alone what's not in our galaxy and places that we can't see. I don't think life is the exception. It's the rule. When me and you were growing up and going to school, elementary school, we were told there was no planets outside of our solar system. Mm-hmm. Everybody who is now 22 years or older, or 22 years or younger, was in kindergarten when we're taught that that planets exist outside of our solar system. So it's constantly changing in such a dramatic way. And another thing you mentioned about the computers, it's very fascinating how fast and how complicated and how complex our computers have become. The lunar module that landed the Apollo 11, the astronauts on the moon, had less computing power than a small handheld pocket calculator. And I thought that was extremely fascinating compared to what we have now. And you're right. I can't even imagine what the quantum computers of the future would be, or what these high intelligences would be. Now, let me go back and I'm going to ask you a theoretical question. Assume you were the person in charge of these clandestine organizations, or maybe even the president of the United States who was in the know. What would you do to change the world with regards to the understanding you have to essentially effectuate among the mainstream physicists and academics that they're wrong, that, thinking outside the box, to explore the equations you have, and to essentially disclose to the people all the secrets that have been hidden from everybody?
Right. Well,
how would you handle
it? Wow, that's a big question. First of all, I would say, the idea that the President of the United States is in the know is a big assumption. I think the industrial military complex doesn't necessarily disclose to the political branch what goes on down there. But the other thing is that. And again, it's assuming that the President of the United States has the power to do anything about it. And I don't actually think he does, or she does, or whoever it would be. But let's say I was in a position to make that transition happen. The first thing that has to occur is that the industrial complex, the corporations, have to be reined in. They have to be taken out of the legislation and the political process, so that they're put in their place and that they become responsible with the environment, responsible to humanity in what they do on our planet. that's kind of critical. Of course, releasing some of the information that's available in some of these institutions would have an impact on the economy, would have an impact on the industrial complex that would have to be mitigated. So it has to be done in an appropriate way so that there is not massive amount of suffering as a result. But there's a transition that can be done in which the industry is rolled over to a new way of doing things. Just like the industry of taking care of horses before the event of the automobile. All of a sudden these guys had to convert into becoming mechanics. There's a way to make the transition happen that would be very, very positive for humanity. Those things would have to come along with some very fundamental disclosures about our history, the community that has held information about advanced civilization that might have been in contact with us. I would bring that to the public. I think the public is ready for it. I think the public is way more mature in their understanding than what is estimated by the government. And as well, I would revamp the academic educational system in which children are not assumed to be, blank slate that we can just throw information at and just get them to remember it, to an educational system in which children are encouraged to explore their gift and explore their creativity and to find what they are here to contribute to humanity, and encouraged to think outside the box instead of discouraged to think outside the box. And I think that would probably be one of the most significant changes, because there is no reason why we shouldn't have thousands, millions of Einsteins out there. Some of these kids that come around these days are incredible, and they need to have to be encouraged and supported. And the world we would live in, if that was done, would change very rapidly, dramatically.
I like what you said about the president. I also believe you in the sense that I don't think he knows, because for a couple reasons. First of all, you have a politician who's going to be in there for maximum 8 years. Why would you fill him in information that essentially could be jeopardized versus somebody who would be in it for the long haul? And then also, I'm starting to believe that I don't know if it's necessarily government figures that are holding knowledge, that it's probably private corporations that don't have to answer to the public. Freedom of information requests don't, affect them in any way. And so I definitely agree with you there, and I think that's the way we need to come. There will be changes, as you said, to people's religion, and they will be affected. But as humans, we deal with crisis as well, and we can accept change. Although people may fear it initially, I think it's very, very easy to overcome.
Right.
Now, a couple more questions for you. What do you think we can do to thrive? I know I'm just taking this out of the movie. We shouldn't be just surviving. We shouldn't have people dying all over the place. There's no reason to have famine. There's no reason for us to be burning, fossil fuels and destroying our planet and all this other stuff. What do you think it's going to take for us to change our ways? I know I gave you the hypothetical of what would you do if you were, the person in power to disclose, but in your own mind, not necessarily being that person in power, what are your general ideas that we need as humankind globally that each and every person out there can do themselves to effectuate a better planet?
Right. Well, certainly, I think that being aware of what is actually available and going on is critical. For people to be informed, that people can actually have an impact by gathering and informing each other and supporting each other and being part of organizations like Thrive and making a difference. Like, it actually does a huge it has a huge benefit, like supporting organizations like Strive, like the Resonance Project Foundation. It allows us to actually move forward and talking about it with your friends, debating with your family, whatever, but actually being a participant, being involved, getting involved, I think is so critical. But as well, at a deeper level, maybe even each person actually connecting, and that's something that I find really appealing about some of the stuff I found. I mean, we've had all of these masters come along in our history telling us, go within. That's where the knowledge is. That's where you connect with the divine. That's where you connect with the universe. And the equations I wrote literally said exactly that within the proton is all the information of all the other protons in the universe, that all the information is present. To actually take the time every day to connect with your source, connect with your nature, to spend even if it's just a few minutes a day, just going within and connecting and walking in the world from that place I think, can have a massive impact. And of course, in order for our world to thrive, and if we succeed at actually gathering the forces and as people coming together and making this groundswell that's going to change the way we do things, of course, technologies that are emerging are going to completely change the way we do things. We can extract an incredible amount of energy from this field of information that's present at the quantum level. It's extremely dense. If we extracted 1/billionth of a percent of what's in a centimeter cube of space of that energy, we could run the planet for thousands of years without burning one drop of fuel. And of course, if we can control gravitational field, we can be space bound. We can live in space. We can come back to the surface and treat the surface as the garden instead of living on the surface. Many civilizations in the universe that survived probably eventually transitioned to a space-bound culture because planetary systems change. They go through catastrophic events. They get hit by comets or even just meteorites or just one sun flare in the right direction strong enough, and poof, the atmosphere goes, and so on. So, there's many different ways and many different things that must happen, but I think the most important one is that people get involved and talk and discuss and band together and make that change happen.
I'm really glad you said a couple things, and one of them you actually sort of answered my next question. People do need to get together. People do need to get involved. Sitting quietly and being passive and waiting for the world to change is not going to change. Each and every person has a duty to do it for themselves. Martin Luther King organized the Million Man March. I'm just blown away why people in the world can't even get 10,000 people together to start protesting, to demanding this sort of knowledge. The question that I was going to ask that you sort of already answered was going to be, when you talked about looking within, I was going to ask you, how can people tap into the universal consciousness, which you actually already answered. So I'm going to go on to the other question, which is, this is pure speculation, and I'm going to ask you for both the good and the bad. Where do you see human civilization 50 years from now, 100 years from now, both in the proper good sense, that applying the equations that you learned, becoming a more peaceful society, and on the other end of the spectrum, where things are continued to be censored and the information is still suppressed and people don't apply what we can learn from you?
Well, you know, on the good side of things, I think that if we make this transition appropriately, we will, if we will, in a very short amount of time, in the next 2 decades, we'll have a civilization that's fairly harmonious with the natural world, that's able to have a very peaceful relationship with each other, because many of the issues that produce war and dispute and so on have to do with fear of running out of resources or space and so on, and overpopulation. I think if we learn to control gravity, which is very possible, and actually is on its way, and it's allowed to be brought to the public, and it's allowed to be commercialized and so on, and that we can transition our society successfully in the next decade or two, I think this civilization is going to be awesome. I think we're going to do, and it's going to be amazing. We will be able to be harmonious with each other. We will have almost infinite amount of resources that, you know, because of course if you can go back and forth, for instance, just to the asteroid belt, you can get chunks of ice or water, you can get, you know, metals, materials, anything you need. And as well, the overpopulation problem of our surface goes away. All these things become resolved, and the stressors that produce war generally goes away. For instance, energy production from the structure of the vacuum becomes the major part of our civilization and changes everything. Now, if we are not successful at making this transition, if things continue to be censored, if the world doesn't get behind this and actually become active and making this transition happen, it's not looking good. I mean, some of the studies that came out last year showed that, and this was published in Nature, one of the most strict peer-reviewed journal, you know, shows that some of the largest cities in our world will have their coldest day be their hottest day in history by 2047. So many of the places on Earth that are livable today will become wastelands. And, you know, our planet, I don't think has much chance to overcoming if we don't make this transition. I see within 50 to 100 years this planet completely decimated if we don't make that transition. However, I'm very positive and enthusiastic, and I have a lot of faith that we will be able to make this transition. From what I've been seeing, I see everything breaking up into, you know, more and more people, whether inside the military, the agencies, the governmental branches and so on, they're awakening. People are, you know, realizing what we're doing and that we might need to change direction. And people have children, they have family and so on. They want this change as well. And so I'm pretty positive that it will happen.
Well said. I totally agree with you. We can absolutely live a harmonious, peaceful life, and we can achieve so much more. As Michio Kaku says, we are in a Type 0 civilization. We can be a Type 1 civilization and eventually get to a point where we're interacting with our space brothers and sisters and ending this primitive tribal warfare. And you're right. I do see great hope for our future, and I hope we don't go down the wrong path of what we've had, because as you mentioned, 2047 could be that pivotal year, and we've already seen this extreme weather happening. Anyway, Mr. Haramein, it has been such a fascinating interview with you, and you are truly a true cosmologist, a visionary, and so much more. I hope everybody out there has enjoyed this as much as I have. And I want to ask you, if you have one final message you'd like to give everybody out there listening, what would you have to say?
I would have to say, wake up every day like it's a miracle, because it is. It is this world, your life, your existence, your capacity to think and be is a miracle. And then, from that place of gratitude and appreciation, go into the world and make the change that we want to see.
Well said. Nassim Haramein, everybody, the one and only, like I said, a true cosmologist, a visionary, to me, up there with Einstein, Leonardo da Vinci, and so much more. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Join us again Tuesdays and Thursdays, drjradiolive.com. You'll see all the upcoming guests. And with that being said, this is Dr. J signing out.